Good evening, one and all. Once again, it gives me an immense pleasure to invite you all for the second day of the National Webinar Series hosted by PG and Research Department of English, Pachapas College, Chennai. Now, I request Dr. K.R. Vijaya, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to introduce the speaker of the day.
Thank you, Shiva. Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. K.R. Vijaya, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Pachapas College, Chennai. I am very much privileged to introduce the esteemed speaker of this session, Dr. Vithal G. Kaur. Sorry if I have pronounced the name wrongly. So, Dr. Vithal G. Kaur, Assistant Professor, Head of the Department of English, Sri Havagiswamy College, Woodgir, Maharashtra. He has been teaching English literature, communication skills, and phonetics since 1997. He obtained his MA degree from SRT, MPhil from MKU, and PhD from Osmania University. He has received many international certifications from ETS USA India Limited and Cambridge University, UK. He is a recognized supervisor for guiding MPhil and PhD students, and he is a syllabus committee member for various boards and institutions. He is also a resource person for UGC-sponsored conferences and seminars. He is also an editor for various national and international research journals. And to his credit, he is also a supervisor for many students, guiding MPhil and PhD students. So we are eagerly looking forward to your speech, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, K.R. ma'am. Now I request Dr. Vithal Gore to take over the session.
Very good evening, friends.
Good evening.
Respected convener, Ms. S. Arasi, organizers, Dr. K. Svapriya, and Mr. E. Asaytambi, and all my dear participants. First of all, I would like to appreciate the endeavors put in by Pachayappa College, Chennai, for organizing this 5-day national webinar series on modern trends in literature. Friends, the topic assigned to me by the organizers is Shakespearean tragedies, a result of failure in communication. Right from schooling, we have been studying William Shakespeare with a kind of interpretation as provided by A.C. Bradley, and subsequently a number of critics in the course of time have definitely added a few more interpretations as well. As the title of this series is Modern Trends in Literature, and since we are talking about modern trends in literature, I thought like we should also put an effort to apply a modern theory, especially in the respect of Shakespearean tragedies And as you know very well, soft skills, a very good command over communication skills has become a prerequisite for your survival, for your existence. And whatever big contribution William Shakespeare has made before 400 years or so, I personally believe, and I hope you will also agree with, that these things are very much relevant even today. It is not only in the respect of the universal acceptance of the four great tragedies, but you can pick up any of the contributions, literary contributions as made by William Shakespeare. You will find that each of his contribution has a universal appeal. Moreover, it has a contemporary context. So in simple words, you can say, William Shakespeare was not only a literary figure who immensely contributed to the field of drama, but he was a man with universal values. He was a man with the foresight for future, and probably based on all these values and ethics of his own, he could really contribute to the world of literature. So friends, as I said, I'm going to talk on Shakespearean tragedies as a result of failure in communication. Many of us, those who are very particular as far as the interpretation of Shakespearean tragedies are concerned, we still think in the similar box as provided by A.C. Bradley. And we kept on thinking that the kind of interpretation which is provided by A.C. Bradley, as he said, that the Shakespearean tragedies are the result of a tragic flaw in the central character. And of course, the kind of interpretation, very meticulous interpretation that the critique has made, it is of course convincing, no doubt about it. But here my proposition is to put an effort to interpret Shakespearean tragedies with different perspectives. As you know, we have a sociological perspective, psychoanalytical perspective, historical context, colonial or imperial point of view. Even you can interpret some of his plays based on the feministic values. Likewise, I'm trying to convince you that the Shakespearean tragedies are not the result of a tragic flaw only, as said by A.C. Bradley. But if at all you could really take up a few select plays of William Shakespeare and try to analyze based on the communicative approach, you will realize that this modern perspective to Shakespearean tragedies will eventually prove that the plays of William Shakespeare, not all, but some of them, are the result of failure in communication. So before I proceed with the communicative approach as applicable especially in the context of Shakespearean tragedies, I'll just take up a very quick look at the characteristics of Shakespearean tragedies as presented by A.C. Bradley. As all of us are very well familiar with, the Shakespearean heroes are the tragic heroes. The central character is either cursed by the fate or goes through a tragic phase of life and finally meets his catastrophic end. We have also seen that there is a struggle between good and evil. In addition, you have hamartia, which is the focal point of the interpretation of A.C. Bradley, that you call the fatal flaw in the character of the hero. And the way, if you really interpret it, you will realize that it is the hamartia, it is the tragic flaw that is leading the central character to his or her own catastrophe. And based on this proposition only, A.C. Bradley has presented the interpretations of all these plays, especially the tragedies written by William Shakespeare. Then beyond that, you have the features like external conflict, internal conflict, the element of catharsis. You have the lack of poetic justice, supernatural elements, comic relief, so on and so on. These are the general characteristics of Shakespearean tragedies, and I'm sure that each one of us is very well familiar with these things. But in this fine evening, I'm not going to talk on the characteristics of Shakespearean tragedies. My focus is to revisit Shakespeare with a modern approach. And as one of the modern approaches is your communicative approach. So before we proceed with the interpretation of a select plays of William Shakespeare, let me focus in a nutshell on this particular concept called communicative approach. Actually, the communicative approach is based on the idea to communicate the real meaning. See, please, be focused on some of the, focal points that I highlighted over here, because these words will be very crucial while interpreting the plays of William Shakespeare based on this particular theory. And one more thing we need to remember, that language is a medium of communication, no doubt. And language learning is nothing but to learn how to communicate. And as far as the language is concerned, we simply use it as a medium for the purpose of communication. So finally, language is used to communicate, but we need to be so appropriate as far as the use of language is concerned. We need to be conscious about the situation, the role of the speaker, the setting, and whatever actually that happens around that automatically creates influence on us. And here, the learner needs to differentiate between the kind of formal and informal style of language as well, while using the language for communication purpose. So finally, coming down to the conclusion of this slide, the focal aspect of communicative approach is to look into the skills called macro skills like listening, speaking, reading, and writing. These four are integrated from the beginning once we start learning a language. And since the communication integrates these different macro skills that really make us capable enough to communicate with the world. And now you see this communicative approach sometimes is also called either a functional approach or a notional approach. You can even combine it together. You can say functional and notional approach. So as far as functional approach is concerned, what exactly the people want to do with language and what is the actual purpose of language, that is the focal aspect of functional approach. And as far as the notional approach is concerned, what the meaning the people really want to convey while using language. So these two things we need to remember throughout when we try to interpret the tragedies written by William Shakespeare. Now let us come to the core of my presentation. As I said, I'm going to talk on Shakespearean tragedies through the communication perspective. And here I have taken up three major tragedies by William Shakespeare. One, Othello. Second, Julius Caesar. And the third, King Lear. Now let us try to look into each of these three, one after the other. As everyone will agree that Othello has a solid foundation to interpret the play in the communication and cross-cultural perspectives. Because you know very well the kind of language spoken by or used by this Othello, who belongs to the black community. Secondly, you have his fiancée, his wife later, that is Desdemona, belongs to the white community. And right from the beginning, you realize that there is a lot of potential in the play to interpret it based on the communicative approach, more particularly the cross-cultural communication perspective. Because Othello belongs to one culture. On the other hand, you have Desdemona belonging to a different culture. And here, this cross-cultural understanding, mutual understanding, and later the play is leading to a kind of suspicion and disbelief. All these things can be analyzed based on this particular approach. Secondly, you have Julius Caesar, which is a play which has a perpetual problem of ideological differences. Of course, the ideological differences of Julius Caesar, you have your Brutus, Antony, Casca, and so on. But altogether, when you try to find the core of the play, you will realize that there is a lot of influence of one's oratory skill in the play that is really a turning point in the entire play, and that oratory skill again lead to your own ability of using language effectively. That is your communication skills. And the third play that I'm going to interpret is King Lear, that begins with flattery. Mind it well. Can you really easily flatter for somebody or about somebody? No. Unless you have the language skills, you will not be able to flatter. And here, the play begins with the flattery and leads to the communication failure, followed by the catastrophe of the central character. So this is going to be the line of thinking as far as these three plays are concerned. Now let us look into the first one. That is your Othello through the communicative approach. And right in the beginning, you need to accept that there is a lack of proper communication between Othello and Desdemona. Some of you may disagree and you may say that, sir, both of them fall in love for each other. And even Desdemona got against her father and got married to Othello and preferred to live, throughout her lifetime with him. How can you say that there is a lack of proper communication? See, I did not say there is a lack of communication. I said there is a lack of proper communication. What do you mean by that? So the foundation of their love is not the mutual understanding, but the kind of information that Desdemona got about the valorship of Othello in the battlefield. In fact, Desdemona did not know anything about Othello, but constantly she heard about Othello and his warriorship there in the battlefield. And in the course of time, she created, some liking for this fellow. And later, they fall into love. So the foundation of their love affair is not a mutual understanding for each other, but the liking for each other's personality facets. Right? So this thing you need to remember throughout, because it will be helpful to you to analyze at the end. Then you see here your villainous character Iago, who is really jealous and plays several tricks in order to destroy the connubial life, and ultimately the play leads to catastrophe. See, the kind of interesting aspect that you find in the play is whatever malice, whatever jealousy that Iago had for Othello and his success, he is trying to inject something negative in the mind of Othello. But here, the communicative approach needs to be analyzed again, that Othello hardly insists Iago to produce any concrete proof for Desdemona's extramarital life and extramarital affair. He never asked for it. Probably it is the failure of Othello from his side as far as his communication skills are concerned. See the fun here. Othello blindly believes in Iago and whatever he says about Desdemona and her so-called, lover. One more thing that you will identify in the course of the interpretation, that there was no amicable inquiry made by Othello, neither with Desdemona or with Cassio, whether they are really in love for each other. But the most important point is Othello constantly, suspects the chastity and character of his own wife. The lady who left her father forever for the sake of Othello. If you see the beauty of Desdemona as described by William Shakespeare and the personality of Othello, especially his color and so on, actually both are totally contrasting. So she did not fall in love based on the color, creed, or belonging. She fell in love with Othello because of his warriorship, because of his valorship there in the middle of the battles. And here you need to recognize that the foundation of love that they had for each other is really different. So Othello's cognizance of being a Moor, as I said, he was a Moor, and suspicion of her chastity, her character, it is only because of her fairness, her being white, and that is playing the major role in this tragedy. Whether you accept it or not, but once you start interpreting the play, especially based on several dialogues as provided by the playwright, finally you will realize it, the kind of cross-cultural identities, the kind of communication gap between the 10, and the kind of cross-cultural communication which was expected to be there, and whereas it is lacking there. All these things will reveal. So in this respect, I would like to make a couple of comments. That warrior achieves, see here, the most important thing in this respect is the warrior achieves whatever success. See, so as I was talking about the kind of communication gap and the cross-cultural identity problem between the two, that is actually leading this play to tragedy. Here you can simply say that the warrior achieves high rank in military hierarchy because of his warriorship, but fails to understand his own wife. See the contradiction here. And why it actually happened? It happened because of the poor communication skills on the part of Othello. And this poor communication skill ability that is lying with Othello, it is not only an obstacle in the, it is not an obstacle in the military success, but that has become a hindrance as far as his marital life is concerned. His strong action in the battlefield speaks louder than words, whereas his bravery actually wins Desdemona, but his suspicion loses her. See the kind of contradiction again. As far as his bravery is concerned, in the middle of the battlefield, that is actually responsible to win the favor of Desdemona. But what is the contradiction in his life? The contradiction in his life is the kind of suspicion, the kind of doubt that he has in his mind for her character and chastity, that is playing a crucial role as far as the loss of Desdemona is concerned. So simply you can say, Othello achieves high military rank, but fails to become a good spouse. He may be a successful warrior. He may be a successful soldier. He may be a successful, the man who controls all affairs of the state on the behalf of the king. But unfortunately, he fails to become a good spouse. And I think this contradiction is quite obvious over here. So in the feministic point of view, once you start interpreting, you will realize that he had no respect for womanhood, and he continues to disbelieve his own wife, that is Desdemona, her chastity and character. And why actually it happened? It happened because of the communication gap. It happened because of the lack of proper knowledge of the cultural values of each other. It happened because of the cross-cultural identities and the cross-cultural lack of knowledge. So simply you can say the lack of communication skills, the lack of cross-cultural identities, the lack of cross-cultural communication that actually works positively in professional life of Othello. But the same thing, as I said, that is cross-cultural identities, cross-cultural communication, and communication skills, these have played a negative role in the conjugal life of Othello and Desdemona. See here, the last point that I would like to make, that also creates another contradiction. The villain Iago, who is very, very effective in speaking, whatever he says is easily convincing to Othello, and finally this Iago achieves his wicked goals in the course of time. Just take a couple of references in this respect. If you go through the text, you will come across Act 3, Scene 3. Othello himself accepts that he is rude in speech, and he also admits that he cannot deliver a long, convincing speech. And in this dialogue, he says, "Haply for I am black, and have not those soft parts of conversation that chamberers have, or for I am declined." So this dialogue is quite apt and suggestive. First of all, it will let you know that he is conscious of being a black, number one. He is a Moor. Second thing, he admits that as far as the communication skills are concerned, soft skills are concerned, he is not that competent as the chamberers are. He says very clearly here, "Haply for I am black, and have not those soft parts of conversation." When you say soft parts of conversation, means soft skills, or else you can say communication skills in particular, that the chamberers have. See, Venetian Senate is there, and chamberers or the senators do speak very polished language, and he himself agrees. Since I am black, I am not good at communication skills as the chamberers have, or as the royal people or the senators have. So this particular dialogue will let you know that Othello himself agrees that he is not good at communication skills, and later in the course of time, the lack of proper communication skills, the lack of proper cross-cultural identities, the lack of proper cross-cultural communication is leading this particular play to a catastrophe. Now you see another contradictory aspect over here in the play. Now I would like to talk in the respect of Desdemona. Desdemona, as you know, she belongs to the white community, looks very fair, seems to be a very balanced lady, I would say. And she is very much aware of her dual role. Dual role in the sense, her role as a daughter and her filial gratitude for her father, her role as a wife, and her commitment and dedication for the husband. See the kind of language used by Desdemona. It will give you the sense of her, profoundness of ideas. And when she speaks, she says, while talking to her father, "My noble father, I do perceive here a divided duty. To you, I am bound for life and education. My life and education both do learn how to respect you. You are the lord of my duty. I am hitherto your daughter, but here is my husband." Now she's talking about her husband Othello. "But here is my husband, and so much duty as my mother showed to you. See, this statement is very important here. This dialogue is very crucial. As so much duty as my mother showed to you, preferring you before her father, so much I challenge that I may profess due to the Moor. This Moor means Othello, my lord. So this is the dialogue that I picked up from Act 1, Scene 3. Here, Desdemona is clearly pointing it out that she is very well aware of her responsibility as a daughter. She is very much conscious of her role as a daughter, and she is aware of her filial gratitude to her father. But at the same time, very bluntly and clearly, she tells her father that whatever expectation do you have from me, probably I'll not be able to oblige it, because whatever role my mother played towards you and her father, probably I got the same cultural values and I am going to follow it, as these are the sanskaras done by my mother and you as a father upon me. So see the effectivity of dialogue. See the effectivity of language. So here in the first half of the play, you will find that Desdemona is very convincing, very clear as far as her communication is concerned. But I'm also surprised when I see the second half of the play. Once she is there, into the fort, and there is a problem between these two, husband and wife, she is not as convincing as she is found in the first half of the play. So let us go further. Here you will realize that this particular dialogue before the Venetian Senate shows her profound and meticulous approach to life. She has a great respect, credit, and filial gratitude for her father. She looks, for the future prospects as well, since she is very committed and dedicated for her husband, Othello. And her dialogue clearly tells us that she is a composed and a balanced lady as far as her meticulous ideology is concerned. So Desdemona was successful in convincing the Senate, especially when she justifies her relations with her father as a daughter and her relations with her husband as a wife or a spouse. And she is quite successful in her attempts. But you see, towards the end of the play, Desdemona becomes defensive. Already I told you, in the first half of the play, Desdemona is very effective in her communication, as long as she was here with her father in Venice. But once she moves to another cultural identity, that is the cultural ethos of Othello, she is found to be defensive. She looks to be ineffective while convincing Othello, and whatever allegations he is also making against her. All these things are totally contradictory. And that's why I have already told right in the beginning that there is a lot of scope to interpret the play based on the cultural values, based on the cross-cultural communication, based on the ability of an individual, while using various skills of communication. In fact, Desdemona speaks clearly, truthfully. But unfortunately, as you know very well, Othello is poisoned by Iago. He fails to understand her honesty, but he never suspects the villainy of Iago. This contradiction is also quite considerable. You don't believe in your own wife, but you do believe in the villainous character like Iago. You suspect the character of your wife, but you don't suspect the intentions of Iago. So this contradiction is an interesting aspect of the play, and that we need to analyze in detail as far as the cross-cultural communication and the lack of proper understanding between the two, especially in the second half of the play. So finally, I would like to say in this context, Othello fails on two fronts, one on the military front and another on the marriage front. He is a complete failure. Because once he loses Desdemona and later comes to know about the reality, he commits suicide. So that is also the end of Othello as a warrior. He fails to understand the tricks and infidelity of Iago. On the contrary, you see, he also fails to understand the pure, dedicated, committed love of Desdemona. The poisoned notion of his wife that really suspects or creates suspicion in his mind for her chastity and character. So finally, what happens then? Othello loses everything just for suspicion and the lack of proper communication, lack of proper cross-cultural identities, and the better understanding of the identities. And this has really led the play to a complete catastrophe and the end of Desdemona, followed by the end of Othello. So this is how you can really come to a conclusion here that the element of doubt and element of suspicion breaks the process of dialogue. You see now how I'm trying to lead it to the interpretation based on the communicative approach. Once you have the element of doubt and suspicion in your mind, it will automatically break the process of a dialogue. It will break the process of communication. And under the shadow of suspicion, you can never have a good dialogue or a successful dialogue or a good communication as such. So Othello's no attempt to cross-verify whether Iago tells truth, but he kept on, making allegations against his own wife. Finally, he fails to ask Desdemona about it, by taking her into confidence. And finally, what happens then? She also loses confidence. He also loses self-confidence. There is a breakup between the two. Breakup in the sense, whatever mutual understanding they had right in the beginning of the play, that sort of mutual understanding is not found later. Once your Iago is poisoning the mind of Othello. So suspicion and the impulse of infidelity occupies the mind of Othello, and that lack of mutual understanding between the two destroys the bond of love and the oath of trust that they had once upon a time. So this is how is the interpretation that we can do as far as Othello as a tragedy written by William Shakespeare is concerned. Now I will switch over to the second part of my talk, that is Julius Caesar through communicative approach. Let us look at, the entire play. The storyline is already known to you all, so I'm not getting into that now. So Caesar's dictatorial kingship and Marcus Brutus' democratic values, these two values are the core of the confrontation of the play. Julius Caesar, who is a dictatorial king, and he wants that kingship should be continued. Whereas Marcus Brutus and his followers, they have the democratic values and they wanted to establish a democratic country. So this has become the core of confrontation between the two. So how this play can be interpreted based on communicative approach? Let us look at that. Failure in communication and inability to convince each other for one's ideological values is actually the major focus of the play. Marcus Brutus has democratic values. Caesar has dictatorial kingship and the kind of royalship values. And both are promoting their own values, and ultimately the confrontation is there between the two. Now you see the kind of speeches which are delivered by Marcus Brutus, Antony, especially, you know, at the time of the funeral. These are the masterpieces in the domain of knowledge. The oratory skills of Marcus Brutus and Antony, they actually teach us extraordinary lesson of communication skill and the effectivity of elocution. Now, right now, I'm talking to you all. You do also talk to the people. You to deliver your speeches and lectures in the classes. Our oratory skill is tested time and again. And here, the oratory skill of Brutus and Antony is the major focus of the play, and the whole play revolves around that particular point only. How does it happen now, you see? And how this communication aspect is quite crucial in the respect of this play as well. So Caesar, Julius Caesar, I mean to say, ignores the warnings, and his overconfidence brings him to catastrophic conditions. Okay, you should have confidence, no doubt. But your overconfidence is something working negatively for you. So he kept on ignoring the warnings as given by the soothsayer. I hope you remember the words of soothsayer, you know, called idea of March. Hey, Caesar, they have come, but not gone. This dialogue is very indicative. This dialogue is very apt and suggestive, and that was all clear from the soothsayer side. But unfortunately, Julius Caesar failed to understand the kind of very clear communication made by the soothsayer. And that's why I say the play leads to catastrophe because of failure in communication, whether it is on the part of the central character or on the part of the other characters as well, whatever it may be. But the foundation of catastrophe is nothing but communication failure. So both the times, you know, whenever this soothsayer is trying to convince Caesar and giving him some sort of, indications that something is going wrong in the state, Caesar fails to understand it. His military success actually makes him rude and oblivious about the possible danger. He could not anticipate that. And failure to understand and mutually understand the soothsayer and his words and his oblivious and rude nature is actually leading this play to a tragic one. So the misunderstanding and the failure lead to the confrontation of two strong characters in the play, mind it well, not one but two, Julius Caesar and Marcus Brutus both. Because later, as you know, you have Brutus and Antony, whose speeches are playing crucial role in the entire play. So these ideological confrontations lead this play to a tragedy. Let us, read one dialogue here that you come across in Act 3, Scene 1. Caesar interacts with the conspirators there in the Senate hall. I could be well moved if I were as you. If I could pray to move, prayers would move me, but I am constant as the northern star. See, this is the conviction. This is the determination. This is the steadfastness. This is the feature of being constant to the values, one's own values. And these values can be seen in the character of Julius Caesar, as he clearly says, I am ready to die, but I am not ready to compromise, because whatever role I have been playing, I will stick up to the same throughout. And that's why he calls himself as constant as the northern star. So in Act 3, Scene 3, Antony asks Brutus, see now how the play moves forward. In Act 3, Scene 3, Antony asks Marcus Brutus permission to say a few words, and this is the biggest ever mistake committed by Brutus. Right? Conspirators have played their role. They assassinated Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was no more. Now he is lying on the pyre. All are going, gathered over there to, ignite the pyre of Julius Caesar. But here, very politely, Antony asked Marcus Brutus whether he could say a few words in appreciation of Julius Caesar. And giving the permission is the biggest mistake done by Brutus. And that is leading him to his own catastrophe. So he speaks, how, diplomatically your Antony speaks. Antony speaks about Julius Caesar for being faithful and just. But what happens in the course of time? Antony turns the table against the conspirators. And that is all possible only because of the effectivity of his speech, his effectivity of communication skills, his convincing power with the help of words and wisdom. So Antony's move to deliver a speech seems to be a casual one. While going through the play or while watching the play on the stage, we find it as a casual move of Antony. And other conspirators, including Brutus, they do take it easily because they feel that Antony will not be more harmful to them at all because they have already assassinated Julius Caesar. And what Antony will do? But once Antony mentions Marcus Brutus as an honorable man, by appreciating and by giving utmost respect to Marcus Brutus by calling him honorable man, suddenly what happens? Antony turns the table against the conspirators and he says, he was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious. And Brutus is an honorable man. See, the kind of speech, the kind of vocabulary, the kind of effectivity of words, the kind of preciseness that we find in the speech of Antony is something really extraordinary. And that has really turned the table again against the conspirators. So Antony is eventually and equally shocked to see that Marcus Brutus, a man who was very honorable, respectable, and trustworthy in the state of Julius Caesar, who joined hands with the rivals, joined hands with the conspirators. So that he could not actually digest, and he continues to impart a few more facts, in his subsequent dialogue in Act 3, Scene 2, when Antony says, I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? But yet, Brutus says he was ambitious. And sure, he is an honorable man. See the kind of technique adopted by Antony. He actually allegates Brutus, but at the same time, he is trying to convince the people that Brutus is an honorable man. But the kind of act that he did is something not acceptable. So this way, very diplomatically, Antony was successful enough in turning the table against the conspirators. So Antony's convincing ability, his communication skills, his ability of speaking very effectively proves him to be an outstanding speaker in English literature as a totality. So his funeral speech radically changes the mood of the play, and the conspirators miss the opportunity that they have created out of their own conscious efforts by assassinating Julius Caesar. So you can come down to the conclusion and you can say their speeches are full of wisdom and they do communicate a lot for human generations together in the democratic point of view. But it is unfortunate that the three pillars of Roman Empire, that is Julius Caesar, your Antony, and Marcus Brutus, they could not understand one another. And that is the failure of communication. And based on that proposition, we can interpret the entire play, that is Julius Caesar, based on the communicative approach. Now I lead to the last phase of my talk, that is King Lear through communicative approach. As you know very well, William Shakespeare's King Lear actually represents the tragic end of a proud king. And as you know, A.C. Bradley has said that the sense of pride in the character of King Lear is leading him to his catastrophic end. That is the hamartia or tragic flop, according to A.C. Bradley. But my proposition here is that King Lear also lacks a proper communication and the correct reception of ideas. Why do I say so? Because the foundation of the play itself begins with the flattery, and that's why I'm trying to interpret it based on the communicative approach. Because everybody likes flattery. If you say a few good words about, I like it. If I do the same in the respect of yourself, you will also like it. Admiration, appreciation, adulation, flattery, these are the things that everybody loves, right? So here, King Lear's inability to recognize the dishonesty and the flattery of his own daughters like Goneril and Regan, and on the contrary, you have the love and filial gratitude of Cordelia, and her rejection to flattery is all the major concern of the play. Can you tell me, why do Cordelia suffer? Actually, Cordelia suffers for no fault. So that's why we say there is no poetic justice in the plays of William Shakespeare. So right to patrimony is denied to Cordelia, whereas the equal half share is given to Regan and Goneril only because they were successful in making the utmost possible flattery of their father, King Lear. So Lear's blind faith in their flattery is nothing but Lear's failure to communicate and understand his own daughter's real intentions. Mind it well. Probably you may remember the kind of flattery as done by serpent. Okay, actually Saturn in the form of serpent in Paradise Lost, when he was talking and flattering the beauty of Eve. So here you come across another flattery as done by Goneril and Regan. But here the failure is not on the part of these three daughters. The failure is there on the part of the central character, that is King Lear. And as far as the play is concerned, if you go through Act 1, Scene 1, or even a few more scenes over there, you will realize that these aspects are really playing a crucial role in the making of the play. Goneril and Regan diplomatically adulate King Lear, that is their father, whenever they got their turn. But on the contrary, in response to the query made by Lear, Cordelia expresses her true paternal feeling and says, I quote, Act 1, Scene 1, when Cordelia says, unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart onto my mouth. I love your majesty according to my bond, no more, no less. And that's all. She pauses. See here, actually Cordelia tells right from the bottom of her heart about her filial gratitude to her father, the utmost respect that she has for her father. She talks about the natural bond between the father and the daughter. But here, your King Lear fails to understand. And this is the failure of communication, I would say. Cordelia was all clear from her end. But expectations of King Lear were more, And since she did not meet to the expectations, that's why there is a damage in the communication. So unlike the elder sisters like Cordelia and Goneril, your Goneril and Regan, Cordelia fails to appreciate King Lear. And that is going to be her mistake probably. And that's why she meets the catastrophic situations in her life. Then what happened next? This scene is resulted into a stroke of rage in the mind of King Lear for her own daughter, that is Cordelia, and Cordelia was punished. She was banished from the state. And for no fault, she continues to suffer. So she loses her share of patrimony, wanders like a vagabond all over, and the entire plot of the play actually moves around this crucial development, which is related to the language aspect, which is related to the communication skills and so on, having a perpetual effect on every character, mainly King Lear in this. Of course, Lear realizes, no doubt, but that is too late, right? When Goneril and Regan start misbehaving with their own father, King Lear, right? He is, degraded in the course of time continuously, and that has created a lot of agony in the mind of King Lear. Let us look at one of the dialogues over there. In Act 2, Scene 4, Lear talks about his agony and the cruelties of Goneril and Regan. He says, "O reason, not the need, our basest beggars are in the poorest things superfluous. Allow not nature more than nature needs, man's lives as cheap as beast." See the kind of comparison that he has made towards the end of this dialogue. So this dialogue is apt and suggestive enough to convey us the kind of condition that this king has now. After degrading from his kingship, because the whole state is divided into two, half to the Goneril, half to Regan. And now he is no more a king. So once he is degraded to a common man's position, he feels that his life has become as cheap as a beast. And this Lear actually rages against Goneril and Regan for their act of removing his knights, his servants, his degradation day after day. And finally, he compares his own daughters, calls them cruel daughters, to the beast. So this is how is the very minute observation of this play that you can do even on your end. So this development indicates that the absence of knights and the absence of servants would diminish the dignity of a king. Right? This is what there in the mind of King Lear. So he is very much conscious of his position, his reputation, his command over the system. He took it as a blow to his self-respect, and that's why he felt very bad. He got frustrated in the course of time because of the kind of bad treatment given by his elder daughters, that is Goneril and Regan, and all is realized of late when he became powerless. And then he realizes that he has really done some injustice to his youngest daughter, Cordelia. And then starts the phase of penance, then starts the phase of, realization of the kind of mistake that he did. But whatever happened is happened. Ultimately, he could only express his anger and rage for the two elder daughters, and continues to express his disappointment. In one of the dialogues in Act 2, Scene 4, he says, "No, I shall not weep. I shall I have full cause of weeping, but this heart shall break into 100,000 flaws. Or I shall weep, oh fool, I shall go mad. See, this dialogue gives us the utmost miserable condition of King Lear. So this expression shows the depth of his frustration, the depth of his agony, the kind of phase which is a very painful phase for him to go through. And he is totally disappointed, lost all hopes in life, and he could see no ray of hope. Hence, he behaves like a confused man and almost looks like a lunatic. Lunacy is also found in the behavior of King Lear towards the end of the play. So this lunatic dialogue and his behavior, fall from glory and splendor of his life because of his daughters, and the fall from everything to nothing is the major concern of this particular. So while moving towards, the conclusion of this particular part as well, you will realize that there is also a parallel subplot that goes through the play that is all about Gloucester. Probably you might have heard about him or read about him. So Gloucester is deceived by his son. And Gloucester is nothing but a mouthpiece of William Shakespeare himself. Whatever philosophical musings William Shakespeare wanted to promote through certain character, all these are injected through Gloucester. In one of the dialogues in Act 4, Scene 1, Gloucester says, "As flies to the wanton boys, are we to the gods, they kill us for their sports." See here, what are we? We are nothing. We are just the toys, of the hand of Wheel of Fortune. As, William Shakespeare has said through Gloucester, as flies to the wanton boys. You have naughty kids, naughty boys and girls. They do kill the flies here and there, just as a matter of their game, as a sport, as a game. And here, Gloucester says, God, kill us for their sports. So life and death is not in the hands of the human beings. We are all controlled by the unseen power, the unseen authority. If at all you believe in the existence of God, as your Gloucester said, God, kill us for their sports. So Gloucester says that there is no divine justice here in the universe. Human feelings, human dignity has lost its value. Vicious people, villainous people are rewarded and the good people suffer for no fault. This kind of musing, that is the philosophical musing as presented by William Shakespeare through the character Gloucester. And this really leads us, to the further stage of the play, as a matter of fact. So finally, Lear is found in a miserable condition. In Act 5, Scene 3, we come across a traumatic condition for him when he says, "Howl, howl, howl. Oh, you are men of stones." See now, Lear has lost belief in the presence of the people around. He says, "You are men of stones. Had I your tongue and eyes, I would use them so that, heaven's vault should crack." She has gone forever. Talks about Cordelia. I know when one is dead and when one lives, she is dead as earth. So once, he comes to know that his Cordelia, the daughter, the youngest daughter, is no more now, then he realizes the kind of mistakes that he committed. So Lear utters this dialogue when he emerges from the prison carrying Cordelia's dead body in his own hands. His cry for despair suggests us about the theme of injustice in the play. King Lear realizes, and he says that heaven's vault should crack down at his daughter's death. Of course, he committed the mistake in his life. He could not understand his daughter. He failed to communicate properly with her. And this is the most troublesome and painful situation for King Lear. And finally, he loses his temper and went out his disappointment of life. And this is how, once you do the meticulous observations of the play, that will definitely give us a clear picture of the character of King Lear and his outlook to life. He lived a glorious life, no doubt, but fails to understand his own daughter in the course of life. His fall from glory is a punishment to him for the mistake that he committed and the lack of communication that he had. A king is expected to be a very good communicator. His arrogance, pride, love for flattery, his inability to distinguish between good and bad, lack of communication skills actually destroys his own life and the life of his own daughter as well. Finally, we can say that the play has a plenty of dialogues which can be interpreted in the view of the communication failure. King Lear is a character who fails to understand the difference between appearance and reality, between flattery and admiration. And that's why he becomes a catastrophic hero. Consequently, he suffers and becomes responsible for the misfortune of Cordelia. So friends, finally, we come to a general conclusion that the plays that we have taken up for study over here, they can be interpreted based on the communicative approach. As far as Julius Caesar, Marcus Brutus, Othello, King Lear, these characters are concerned, they meet their catastrophic end not because of their fate or not because of the tragic flaw that they had, but it is because of their inability to communicate effectively. They act on impulse. See the difference between the things here. They act on impulse, and that's why they fail to communicate with others. The lack of communication in these characters basically causes their catastrophic end. Julius Caesar lacks the communicative ability because he speaks more with his sword than talking to the people. His overconfidence combined with arrogance mainly leads him to tragedy. Secondly, you have Marcus Brutus, who is very sober in behavior, but fails to understand the attempt of Antony when he kept on admiring Brutus, but at the same time, he was successful in turning the table against the conspirators. So here also, Brutus fails to understand the intentions of Antony while talking to the people in a decent way, quite diplomatically. In the respect of Othello, you will find that he lacks the similar personality facet and fails to understand the tricks of Iago, and ultimately he becomes victim of Iago's trap and drowns his own life, especially the conjugal life, along with his own beloved, that is Desdemona. And finally, we talked about King Lear, who fails to understand his own daughters and makes his own life miserable. And in all these cases, you will realize that it was not their fate. It was not their, tragic flaw, as said, that brings their catastrophe. But it was their personality facet, which is all related to the language incompetence. I am using the word language incompetence that really makes their life as a tragic one. This is how is my proposition in this respect, and the kind of justification as I tried to make with the help of these many references. You can also quote these books and websites for your further study. and analyze some of the select plays of William Shakespeare based on the communicative approach. So I'm thankful to the organizing institution for giving me this opportunity to express my views and a kind of study, especially in the respect of Shakespearean tragedies from this virtual platform. And I am also thankful to all the participants. I could see that the number that we attained right from the beginning, they are quite constant. So I'm thankful to you all. Thank you very much again. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It was a very wonderful lecture for your wonderful time with us. Shall we now move to the Q&A session, sir?
Yeah, please proceed.
Yeah,
Please.
we have two questions from our participants. And the first question is from Kinjal Vaida. The question is, I'm going to read. When we are talking about the communication, I would like to put light on the soliloquies, whether it be of Hamlet or any other place. Yes.
Can you please repeat it once again, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll read it once again.
Yeah.
When we are talking about the communication, I would like to put light on the soliloquies, whether it be of Hamlet or any other place.
Yeah. See, the three plays that I have taken up as an example or as examples over here, it is just indicative. You can also go through the other plays of William Shakespeare, especially tragedies, and you can apply the same theory over there. Okay, now I have taken a general observation of these plays, but I would suggest the researchers to take up one particular play and go through in detail with the communicative approach by identifying a number of dialogues, okay, scattered throughout the play, and you can enlist them, and based on that you can interpret it. You can do it for even other tragedies as well. And Hamlet also has a very solid foundation there.
Yes. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. We shall move to the next question. This is a question from Prashant Kumar. The question is, I thoroughly accept these three tragedies were failed to achieve communication. Can you please tell me, is Romeo and Juliet has achieved the communication approach? If not, please describe it.
Yes, of course, sir. If you go through Romeo and Juliet, you will find that there is also a kind of miscommunication which is taking place in the course of the play. There is a struggle between two families because of the lack of proper understanding and communication. Secondly, there is a misunderstanding created, not intentionally, but it happens when Romeo is far away from the place and he comes to know that his beloved is no more now. In fact, the reality is something different. So what exactly the father wanted to convey and what is really conveyed, there is a difference between the appearance and reality. And that's why this play leads to the tragedy. So this play also can be interpreted based on the communicative aspect. But you need to identify some of the dialogues from different characters which is leading this play to a tragedy, right? Already I told that Shakespearean dramas can be taken up for this particular interpretation, or based on this communicative approach, we can interpret many of his plays, not only Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet or Antony and Cleopatra. Okay, even other plays also can be studied.
Yes.
And there are a very few scholars, those who have really highlighted this aspect of interpretation of Shakespearean tragedies.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you. The next question is from Ms. Arasi about how about the silence of Ophelia in Hamlet? The silence of Ophelia.
Yeah. Really very interesting question. I should admire. See, sometimes we say action speaks louder than words. And I think this is also the communicative approach, right? Even without uttering a word, you can communicate so many things in your life. And probably Ophelia is such a character who is very laconic in expression, right? But her body language, her moves, they do impart so much when she is just in and around certain characters. So that also can be analyzed, okay? But you may have, a minute observation of the laconic ideas or expressions made by Ophelia in the play. Dialogue by Hamlet, Prince Hamlet, to be or not to be, that is the question. If you try to contextualize this particular dialogue, of course, you will go back to the text, back to the storyline or the plot and the context that he was really talking about, whether I should assassinate or kill my uncle Claudius or not, because he is doing prayer and now he is in direct contact with God. If at all I kill him now, he will straight away go to the heaven. But I want to send this person to the hell, not to the heaven. Then only my revenge will be a complete revenge. These are all the moral dilemmas which were going on in the mind of Hamlet. But as a matter of fact, if you try to talk about the universal value of this particular dialogue, I would say that this kind of dilemma, whether it is moral dilemma, professional dilemma, personal dilemma, or any kind of dilemma that comes to our mind, okay, that is there with everybody else. That is the universal value as promoted and presented and dramatized by William Shakespeare in this particular play. When Hamlet said to be or not to be, that is the question. Don't you think that we too come across such kind of dilemmic situations? We are also, having two thoughts parallelly going on in our mind. What to do? Shall I prefer to the first one or the second? So it is there even today, and that is the importance of Shakespearean, writings. Since they are universally accepted, they have the universal values, and moreover, they have the contemporary relevance. Contemporary in the sense, even after 400 years or so, the plays written by Shakespeare, if at all you read and apply them even to the contemporary 21st century situations, they will be equally applicable as they were applicable in the 15th and 16th century. Right? So this aspect we need to take into consideration. So that is my version as far as the dialogue to be or not to be, that is the question as uttered by Prince Hamlet is concerned.
Okay, sir. So, sir, when you talk about the functional and notional approach,
yes,
did we discussed about this communicative approach, like bodily approach, something?
Yes. See,
I'm just asking, sir. Yes.
Yeah, actually, communicative approach, as I said right in the beginning, that communication is possible based on a language. A comprehensive communication is possible with the help of a language, right? So in the absence of the language, you can communicate, called non-verbal communication, but we have our own limitations of non-verbal communication. As just before you talked about Ophelia, so she is very laconic in expression, but even being very silent, she could communicate a lot. So that sort of thing is possible as far as non-verbal communication is there. But for our thorough communication, we need the help of a language. We need the support of a language. Unless we have a language as a medium, we will not be able to elaborate, describe, illustrate, or so on and so on, whatever that we want to do. So as far as language is concerned, language is an instrument for communication. And once you adopt a language as an instrument for communication, automatically that gives you a solid foundation to communicate with the rest of the people around. So whether you talk in terms of functionality or in terms of notions behind, whatever it may be, but the purpose of language is to provide you a platform for communication.
Excellent. Thank you. We shall move to the next question and final one, sir.
Please.
This is a question from Dr. Janani. The question is very lucid presentation, sir. As you discussed
you.
on communicative approach to Shakespeare, can you throw some light on non-verbal cues in the plays you discussed?
Yeah, actually, see,
it's the same one,
it's
yes.
really an interesting question again. But this needs, at least half an hour or 45 minutes to talk about this particular aspect. Because you need to go through several other dialogues which are, spoken by other characters. But at the same time, you monitor these things that of few more characters, and based on these things, you can make these propositions. But I would suggest, like, it needs a meticulous one more look with this perspective for all these plays. Then only we can come, to a conclusion with a better understanding in this respect. So it needs a special session for that.
Yes. Okay. Okay, we have just come to the end of the Q&A session, sir. We shall now move to the vote of thanks, and I will present the vote of thanks here. And we would like to thank Dr. Vittal for your innovative approach to Shakespearean literature, like Othello and Julius Caesar and King Lear. It has really opened many doors in our mind. I believe this analyzed medieval literature in a different way. We would really encourage each one of us to analyze literature with modern approaches like communicative approach, otherwise known as functional notional approach. I believe definitely your lecture is very much useful to go further again, sir. It was a very wonderful time. Thank you for sharing time with us. And on behalf of the Department of English and our college, and we would like to thank you, sir, as well as the participants for being with us today. Thank you, and many thanks to all. Yes. So would you like to say anything, sir?
No, thanks a lot, but thank you very much.